The law office of Baxter and Lyons radiated old Charleston wealth. From its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, crammed with bound legal volumes, to the scent of lemon oil on the antique furniture. I sat quietly in a buttoned-up leather chair outside the oak-paneled conference room, legs crossed, watching my siblings arrive, one by one. Trevor was first, striding in with that same overconfident swagger he'd had since prep school, his navy pinstripe suit tailored to perfection. At 44, he was still riding high on the illusion of being Dad's favored son. Then came Vanessa, tapping away on her phone, her wrists heavy with gold bangles and her heels clicking like an accusation against the marble floor. A silk scarf framed her face like she'd stepped off the cover of a luxury magazine. She didn't so much as glance at me. Last was Colin, perpetually disheveled in an artsy kind of way, as if his wrinkled linen shirt and mismatched socks were a statement. He nodded vaguely at the receptionist, then took a seat as far from me as possible. The receptionist looked up nervously. Stood. Yes. I'm sorry, Mr. Baxter says the reading today is for legal heirs only. I didn't need to look to know Trevor and Vanessa were already exchanging smug grins. This was exactly what they'd planned. What they thought would finally put me in my place. Funny thing about that, I said, standing and adjusting the cuffs of my blazer. I have a 10 a.m. with Mr. Baxter, right on time. Vanessa scoffed. Oh, come off it, Mira. Don't humiliate yourself. Dad cut you out of the family 10 years ago. He made it very clear. Yeah, Trevor added. He said you'd regret walking away from Langley Property Group. Ah, the famous family business. Shopping centers, marina condos, and a boardroom full of egos. Yes, I'd walked away. At 29, I'd had enough of being the silent partner with all the grunt work and none of the respect. I started from scratch with 2 interns, a laptop, and a commercial loan. They laughed back then, called me impulsive, dramatic. They didn't know what I was building while they were busy playing landlords with Dad's empire. The conference room door opened and Gerald Baxter himself appeared. He was in his 70s now, with thinning gray hair and a voice like molasses over gravel. Miss Langley, he said, mildly surprised but quickly recovering. Thank you for being punctual. Everyone, please, come in. Trevor's jaw twitched. She's not supposed to be here, Gerald, Dad said. Yes, about the will, Baxter interrupted smoothly. Before we begin, Miss Langley has something she'd like to share. It's highly relevant. I walked in and sat directly across from my siblings at the long mahogany table. I could feel the tension crackle like dry leaves beneath a match. This is absurd, Vanessa muttered. She's not even in the will. She just wants attention. I didn't rise to the bait. Instead, I opened my briefcase, removed 3 folders, and set them gently in front of Baxter. Actually, I said calmly, I'm here to clarify what exactly it is that Dad owned at the time of his death. Colin looked up for the first time. What are you talking about? He owned everything. The seaside villas, the Kingsborough office park, the properties on Bay Street. Did he? I slid a copy of a property deed across the table. This one transferred ownership 3 years ago. Here's another, transferred 18 months ago. Each one legally purchased, quietly, through separate investment groups. Trevor grabbed one of the documents, his face paling. This is fake. This can't be. Oh, but it is, Baxter said, his voice level. I've reviewed the legal trail myself. Vanessa snatched the papers, flipping through them with trembling fingers. No, this doesn't make sense. Why would Dad sell everything? Emmons didn't, I said, folding my hands. You were too busy running his company into the ground to notice that your biggest competitor, those anonymous holding companies buying up prime assets, was me. The silence was immediate and vast. Colin whispered, You own them now? I nodded. Every building you thought you'd inherit? Every rental income stream you were banking on? I own it all. Baxter cleared his throat, which, I must note, makes the contents of the will largely symbolic at this point. I leaned back in my chair, letting the weight of it settle. I hadn't just walked away from the family business, I'd outgrown it. And when the dust cleared, I wasn't the one left begging for scraps. Actually, Vanessa, I said coolly, sliding another folder across the table, I'm here to save everyone a lot of time. Before we get into what Dad left in his will, we should probably talk about what he actually owned when he died. Colin blinked, like he'd just been pulled out of a daze. His typical morning, a haze, he always looked like sleep was optional and hangovers were inevitable, gave way to squinting confusion. What do you mean? Dad owned everything. The waterfront apartments, the Kingsborough office park, the Bay Street complex. Did he? I asked, my voice even as I opened my briefcase. From inside, I pulled a thick binder and began laying out neatly labeled deeds and transfer agreements. This, I said, sliding the first one forward, is for the Seaside Villas, transferred 4 years ago. Here's the Kingsborough Park, acquired by Greenbridge Group 2.5 years ago. And this one, Bay Street Complex, purchased last January by Coastal Keystone. Trevor grabbed the nearest folder, flipping through the pages with a visible tremor in his fingers. His face turned a sharp shade of pale. This can't be right. Oh, but it is, I replied, my tone still polite as I spread out more documentation like cards in a magician's hand. You see, while you were also busy running Langley Property Group into the ground, I was quietly acquiring its crown jewels. One by one, through shell companies, investment groups, and quiet broker deals. Vanessa's voice cracked for the first time. But those names? We thought those were outside buyers, competitive investors. Did none of you ever wonder why the competition always seemed to move with insider timing? Why your biggest deals were constantly undercut by unknown entities that somehow knew exactly when to pounce? I asked, arching a brow. Her hands shook as she lifted a deed. Riverside Apartments, Maxwell Office Park, Highland Shopping Complex, these all say they belong to Crescent Cove Holdings, Horizon Bay Partners, and of course, Carter Investment Group, I finished for her, crossing my legs, all of which fall under my management umbrella. My company, I added simply. Well, companies, technically. Trevor pushed back in his chair, the legs screeching against the polished floor. That's impossible. Those are billion-dollar assets. Yes, I said, smiling faintly. They are. And they've been mine for years. Dad never said anything, Colin murmured, still looking slightly green. Dad was too busy being furious that I didn't join the family firm to notice I was building my own, a much more modern, scalable, and frankly solvent business. I folded my hands atop the last folder. While he raged, I acquired, quietly, Mr. Baxter cleared his throat. This is, in fact, why I agreed to Mira's request to speak today. As of last month, Miss Langley controls approximately 85% of the total assets your father previously held. Through legitimate purchases, documented transfers, and fully audited financial instruments. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the hum of the wall clock seemed too loud. Colin looked like he was trying not to be sick. When? He whispered. How? I leaned back in my chair, letting the full weight of it settle. Remember 3 years ago when Dad started having cash flow issues? When Langley Property Group began quietly offloading less strategic assets to stay afloat? Vanessa's mouth parted. That was you. It started with the Riverside Apartments, I said, as if reminiscing about a childhood vacation. He thought he was selling to a boutique real estate group out of Savannah. He even liked that they weren't a big corporation, that they felt local. He didn't bother to dig deep enough to realize that Highland Investment Partners was mine. Then came Maxwell Office Park, I continued, bought under Summit Enterprises, also me. By the time I picked up the Highland Shopping Complex last spring, he was practically giving properties away just to make payroll. Trevor's voice was low, nearly a growl. The family business. Langley Property Group, I interrupted, is now essentially a glorified management company. You oversee assets I own, which means your salaries, your budgets, and your futures are, let's say, intertwined with my decisions. Baxter nodded gravely. The will leaves you each equal shares of what remained in your father's estate, which, to be clear, is now almost entirely comprised of personal effects one vintage car, and a modest insurance policy. I stood and closed my briefcase. So no, I wasn't cut out. I simply took a different path, one that turned out to be a lot more profitable. Vanessa sat back, stunned. Colin rubbed his temples. Trevor stared at me like I'd become someone he didn't recognize. They thought they were here to inherit an empire. They didn't realize I already owned it. If you've ever been underestimated by those closest to you, you won't want to miss what happens next. Tap subscribe so you're the first to hear what Mira does when they come asking for a second chance. And she holds all the keys. Managing properties that belong to me, I said evenly. You've all been working for me for the past 3 years. Vanessa's face morphed from shock to calculation in seconds. Classic Vanessa, always scanning for leverage. Dad's will can challenge these sales, she snapped. We'll prove you exploited his age, his trust. This won't stand. Before I could reply, Mr. Baxter cut in. No, you can't. I oversaw every transaction personally. All sales were made at fair market value. No coercion, no deception. Your father agreed to every contract willingly. He looked at me, his tone respectful. Miss Langley simply had better foresight. And, he added delicately, more discipline than other parties involved. Colin, unusually quiet, finally spoke. Did Dad know? His voice was small, almost childlike. Yes, I said softly. I told him 2 weeks before he died. They leaned in, despite themselves. He laughed. I added, my voice barely above a whisper. Actually, laughed. Said he should have known the daughter who refused to join his company would be the one to beat him at his own game. Trevor had gone an interesting shade of purple. This is a trick, he barked. A manipulation. He'd never leave us with nothing. Would you like to see the bank transfers? I offered, calmly placing another folder on the table. The appraisals, the rental income statements, everything is here. You 3 were busy pretending to be real estate tycoons. Meanwhile, I built an empire. Vanessa scoffed. You run a tiny little firm, that rundown building downtown? I smiled. Is the headquarters of a multi-billion-dollar portfolio. Just because I don't need to flaunt it doesn't mean it's not real. It's something Dad finally understood, right before the end. Mr. Baxter cleared his throat. Perhaps now is a good time to read the will? I nodded and sat back, folding my hands as if I were simply a spectator. To my children, Trevor, Vanessa, and Colin, Baxter began, I leave my remaining business interests and properties, which, as Miss Langley has demonstrated, consist primarily of the management company and a few lesser assets. The heir left the room in a single, collective silence. They stared at him, mouths open but speechless. He continued, to my daughter Mira. There it was. The moment they heard my name aloud in Dad's will. I leave my private art collection, my personal residences in Kiowa and Asheville, and a written apology. You could have heard a pin drop. You proved me wrong, Baxter read, and I've never been happier to be wrong in my life. Vanessa's phone slipped from her hand and clattered onto the glossy table. Her diamond bracelets jingled faintly in the echo. The art collection, Trevor croaked. But that's worth more than what's left of the company, I finished, letting the corners of my mouth turn upward. Yes. I know, ironic, isn't it? Trevor stood so abruptly his chair screeched. This can't be legal. Mr. Baxter didn't even blink. It's entirely legal. You are welcome to retain counsel and challenge it in court. But I'll advise you now, as executor and your father's attorney for 25 years, that you'll be wasting both time and money. Colin looked at me, defeated. So, what now? I stood and gathered my papers. Now? Now you decide whether you want to keep pretending you're the heirs of an empire or admit that someone else rebuilt it while you weren't paying attention. I tucked the folders into my briefcase and paused, just for a second. I never wanted revenge, I said more to myself than to them. I just wanted respect. Turns out, building something of your own is the fastest way to earn it. And with that, I walked out, past the portraits, past the leather chairs, past the same cold silence they used to greet me with. Only this time, it was silence born of realization. "I'm calling our lawyers," Trevor said sharply, his chair scraping back as he stood. "Feel free," I replied, calmly gathering my documents, "though you may want to check the management company's contracts first." "Every one of those properties you've been managing? Those agreements are up for renewal next month." The words hung in the air like a slow-moving storm cloud. Without those contracts, Langley Property Group wasn't a company, it was a logo and a dusty office lease. "You wouldn't," Colin said, voice faltering. "We're family." I let out a laugh, short, dry, without warmth. Family? Was it family when you stood by while Dad cut me out? When you called my firm a hobby? When you whispered to brokers that I was unstable, unqualified, unworthy? I straightened my jacket and looked each of them in the eye. "But you're right. We are family, which is why I'm extending an offer." They perked up slightly. "You can all work for me. Real jobs. Entry-level positions. No titles, no favoritism. Just like everyone else." "Entry-level?" Vanessa's voice wavered, her face pale. "But we have experience." "No," I interrupted. "You have practiced spending Dad's money. Now you'll learn what it takes to earn it." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Mr. Baxter shift, clearly trying to hide the smile tugging at his mouth. He'd been this family's legal witness for decades. For him, this had to be more entertaining than courtroom drama. Trevor sat down slowly. "The management contracts," he muttered. "How much?" "Let's discuss it Monday. My office, 9 a.m. sharp," I replied. "Don't be late. I'm not as forgiving as Dad." At the door, I paused. "Oh, and Vanessa? That penthouse apartment Dad gave you? The rent's going up." "Market rate." The door clicked behind me as I stepped into the hallway. From inside, I heard Colin murmur, "Have we been playing Monopoly while she was playing chess?" Inside the elevator, I finally exhaled. My heart beat with quiet triumph. Dad's words echoed. "I was wrong, Mira, so wrong. You didn't reject the family business. You reinvented it." My phone buzzed. A text from Mycia, my COO. "How'd it go?" "Just as expected. Prep 3 entry-level packets. And raise the rent on Vanessa's place. Market rate." Another buzz. "Ruthless. I love it. Lunch?" "Can't. Meeting the art appraiser. Turns out Dad had better taste than his heirs." Outside, Charleston gleamed. Half the skyline belonged to me. Trevor called. I declined. "All business through proper channels. Monday 9 a.m. Bring your resume." Sometimes, the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's rising so far above them, they can't even see you anymore. If you've ever been dismissed, stay steady. Build in silence. Let your results speak. And when they finally notice, smile. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and remember, your legacy is what you build, not what you're given.